Well, welcome everyone to this month's Economic Development Session. I'm Nathan Ohle, President and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. And as we do each and every month, these sessions are meant to have a really intimate conversation with an economic development leader in one sphere or another across not just the United States, but internationally. I'm really excited today to be joined by U.S. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. I have a long history with the Secretary. I worked for her when she was governor of the state of Michigan, and she has been an ardent supporter and active participant in economic development her entire career. So Secretary Granholm, thank you so much for being with us today.
I'm so glad to be on, Nathan. You know, I love the push toward economic development and what the intersection is of policy that can help to incentivize the private sector to do what they are great at. So I'm glad to have this conversation with you.
Excellent. Well, before we jump into the Department of Energy, I want to start where you and I first met, and that was when you were governor of the state of Michigan. You served at a really critical time for the state of Michigan and, quite frankly, throughout the United States and the world. During the 2008 recession and obviously the auto crisis, which hit Michigan really maybe more deeply than any other state in the country.
Not maybe, definitely more.
What lessons did you learn as governor of the state around economic development and how you drive more equitable outcomes for communities of all sizes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you were at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation at that time, and you know very well how hard hit we were and how we were really focused on how to diversify our economy, because we had been for so long, of course, the auto manufacturing state, which we were totally proud of, but we also knew that we had to add new legs to our economic table to balance it, because you can't balance a table on one leg. And so that recession really accelerated our efforts. For example, I mean, we wanted to diversify inside the auto industry and outside it. And when I say inside, I'm talking about the fact that we had built car 1.0, of course, the internal combustion engine, and we wanted to build car 2.0, which was the electric vehicle. And thanks to then the Obama-Biden administration, they gave us a whole lot of grants, not just us, but a number of states, but we got the bulk of them to be able to start electric vehicle battery manufacturing and companies. And, you know, the whole supply chain around the battery was what we were focused on, in addition to adding other sectors like other kinds of energy, renewable energy, wind. We wanted to focus on water technologies, a whole array of things. You know, you were in the middle of that. And so the experience of governing at a time of crisis really was an exclamation point on how we had to accelerate diversification. But you know well that states and cities, and for those who are in economic development, which all you are, it had been, we were competing with other nations, right? As a state and as a country. And we used to say that, you know, the US in competing with China as a state, Michigan competing with China, it was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. We had no economic strategy at the federal level. We had an economic strategy at the state level, but, you know, we only had so much money to go around to provide incentives. We needed a partner at the federal level. And so this is why this, what has happened under the Biden administration is that there is now an industrial strategy around clean energy. And so providing incentives for demand side strategies, so providing, for example, consumer credits for electric vehicles, that you get $7,500 if you buy an electric vehicle that's made in the US, and then providing supply side strategies like tax credits for manufacturing in the United States is really a comprehensive way that we can build a whole sector around clean energy. This market is going to be $23 trillion by 2030. And so taking advantage of the global demand for clean energy products combined with the expertise that the US has in the full supply chain suite from research and development to deployment and hopefully export is really the opportunity of this administration, I think, and very exciting to be Secretary of Energy when all of these tools are now at our disposal. And I will say, Nate, we say in the Department of Energy that this growth in jobs, this economic industrial strategy is really private sector led, but government enabled. And so what are the tools we can use to partner with the private sector to get it going?
Well, let's dive into that more deeply, Secretary Granholm. What is the role in your mind of energy, especially clean energy, in driving economic development and security going forward?
Yeah, I mean, that $23 trillion as a baseline is sort of the North Star of what we look at as, a addressable market, if you will, a total addressable market. And what of that can we get here? What would be natural for us? That economic opportunity is going to be available to every part of the country. This clean energy sector has something for everyone, all kinds of jobs, for all kinds of people, all kinds of opportunity, for all kinds of businesses. We can't capture the economic opportunity without secure and resilient supply chains for clean technologies. And that's why, for example, the Department of Energy last year, we released the nation's first ever strategy to secure the supply chain for a robust clean energy transition. As an example, in the United States, we have very few manufacturers of transformers for the electric grid. All of that has been done largely in Asia. And so what's our strategy? We've got gaps. We want to be able to attract them for our energy security, for our national security as well. And so what's the strategy around that? We have obviously had a gap in extracting the critical minerals for the battery for the electric vehicle. So what's our strategy for that? How can we develop both a research strategy that allows for us to diversify into more readily available materials, but what's our strategy for recycling? But also, can we have a strategy as well for sustainable extraction and a strategy for friend shoring, We're partnering with Canada, with Mexico, with others who do sustainable extraction of critical minerals, et cetera. So we did all of these supply chain reports about and identified where the gaps are. And if we've learned anything from this past year, it's that our economic security is really highly dependent on our energy security. So for example, Putin's attack on Ukraine shows, and it wasn't just their sovereignty, but their energy infrastructure, as we're seeing, shows that the world has been vulnerable to petrodictators. The longer the world remains tied to fossil fuels, the longer we're going to be vulnerable to manipulation, to weaponizing of energy, to economic distress at the hands of a single bad actor. And so clean energy, by contrast, is the greatest peace plan the world has ever known, because you cannot weaponize access to the sun or access to the wind. It is inherently homegrown. It's inherently place-based. It's inherently diverse and reliable, and it's cheap. Solar is the cheapest, the lowest cost energy source on the planet right now. So increasing access to renewables and energy efficiency is going to lower costs for families as well. And of course, making us more independent and less vulnerable. So we know the transition's not going to happen overnight, but believe me, the Department of Energy is all in on this and on helping cities and states, economic development offices, partnerships with international players. We want to be a partner in all of it and provide the right tools to incentivize the location of the manufacturing to happen in the United States.
Well, I love that you use the word partnership, because to me, that's the future of economic development. We've got to build partnerships and collaborate with one another to actually make these things work. And you talked, when you were governor, about that partnership with the federal government, and obviously now you sit in the federal government. The last 2 years, we've seen perhaps the most transformative 2 years of legislative activity of any president's term in the last half century at least. What impact will those pieces of legislation have on the U.S. clean energy sector and the economic development opportunities moving forward?
Yeah, it is just, it cannot be overstated. It is enormous. I mean, all of my counterparts, energy ministers from around the globe, are like, we have never seen anything like this. It is the biggest collection of bills, the 3 bills, which I'll touch on in just a second. And I just want to start by saying I could not be prouder of everything this president has accomplished, because these bills have such profound impacts on the climate and our planet overall, in addition to the benefit for the United States. So first, the backbone of these bills is really the bipartisan infrastructure law. It lays a foundation for this clean energy economy with historic investments in the electric grid, in the existing clean power sources like hydropower and nuclear, and EV charging stations, and next generation technologies like clean hydrogen, long duration battery storage, all of that. So that's the bipartisan infrastructure law. The second bill, as I say, that's the background. The next one is the brain, which is the Chips and Science Act. And that, as you know, invests in research, development, production of semiconductors that are used in our cars and our computers and cell phones. It's also got a lot of investment in our national labs, and the Department of Energy has 17 national laboratories that are focused on the research and development of next generation energy solutions. And that Chips and Science Act invests in that. And then the third piece of legislation is really the lungs, the Inflation Reduction Act, because it really does breathe life into our clean economy through these incentives, financial incentives for families and for businesses and community-led investments. So those three bills together have really placed America on a completely different trajectory for tackling the climate crisis and for creating jobs and for building a 100% clean energy economy. And on climate, I just want to say the DOE's analysis, we've looked at the outcomes of these bills, and they confirm that they put the country on track to cut emissions 40% by 2030, and then we reach the goal of 50% by 2030 with increased action at the federal and state and local governments level and the private sector, which is why this partnership is so important. And we're confident about getting there because we've done the math. And then the next goal is in 2035, which is to get to 100% clean electricity. And to do that, we've got to add 2,000 gigawatts of new clean power to our grid, basically doubling the size of our electric grid, which is, just a little, that 2,000 gigawatts is just a little bit less than China's total power capacity. It's a huge amount. So to do it in time to reach that 2035 goal, we've got to double the rate of clean energy deployment between now and even 2024. We've just got to go, 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 go. And so that's why these three laws and the incentives that they put on the table for the private sector to get in the game are just so important. So, just as an example, in the last 3 months of 2022, right after the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, private companies announced a huge number of new investments. I mean, in fact, I think as of last Thursday, we had a cabinet meeting and I brought the tally of battery company announcements, just as an example. And that's the whole supply chain, right? So, and recall, battery companies have been in Asia. And so we wanted to incentivize the investment of additional battery in the United States. 74 battery companies have announced just in the past bit of time that they are coming to the US to be able to build up that full supply chain. Just shows you how the pull of incentives or the push of incentives does have an impact. Those announcements are almost $100 billion just in the past 18 months or so. So the bottom line, these three laws are making clean energy irresistible, and they'll make the transition irresistible in the United States too.
Well, the other piece to that you learned firsthand in Michigan is not just the manufacturers that have a huge impact. It's the supply chain all the way down to the folks making, the bits and pieces that go into the manufacturing process. So it's going to have a huge impact, not just here in the United States, but globally in this market for sure.
In fact, if you remember when we had the Michigan Economic Development Corporation doing this whole supply chain analysis on batteries. And what do you need? You have to have a company that's doing the anode, a company doing the cathode, a company doing the separator material, a company doing the electrolyte. We have to have the whole thing. And then you've got to have extraction. All of those companies are now announcing in the United States. So it's so great to be thoughtful about what the supply chain looks like, what the strategy is, where there's a comparative advantage for a regional strategy on supply chains, not just on batteries, but on the whole suite of clean energy products. I mean, if you think about offshore wind, for example, along the Atlantic coast, there are all of the components for these offshore wind turbines being built because it's too expensive to transport. It's even too expensive to transport across the ocean because most offshore wind turbines are built in Europe. So they've got to have a local presence. And what does that look like? What does it look like for ports? What does it look like for the supply chain going into those wind turbines? It's really a thoughtful strategy that will require huge partnerships at the local level to get it done right. And that means infrastructure jobs. That means, I mean, there was a story today in the New York Times about the kinds of jobs that are cropping up that are unexpected in this whole push to clean energy. And so the opportunities are just really right.
Absolutely. As you think about those three pieces of legislation you talked about, Secretary, where do you see the role of the Department of Energy really leading an implementation in support of those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look for, let me just give an example. You look at the inflation, the infrastructure. Let me just start with that. Between the two of them, between the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure law, it's about $100 billion in new investments for the Department of Energy to accelerate this transition. A lot of that is going to go straight into industry in the form of competitive grants so that they can scale the impact. So it's been over a year since the bipartisan infrastructure law passed. We've already made huge progress on implementation. So for example, we launched the Building a Better Grid initiative to catalyze the build out of high capacity transmission lines. We've worked with the Department of Transportation to approve EV charging plans for all 50 states and DC and Puerto Rico, so they can start building out their electric vehicle charging networks on corridors so that people, when they get in their electric vehicle, won't have range anxiety. These electric vehicle charging stations have to be 50 miles apart on freeways and not more than a mile off the freeway. So that we've been leading that as well. We opened applications for $7 billion to create between 6 and 10 regional clean hydrogen hubs in the United States. That's a huge economic opportunity for regions. We selected the Diablo Canyon Power Plant in California to receive the first round of funding from our nuclear credit program to keep that clean energy source online. We've hired hundreds of new staff through the Clean Energy Corps to get it done. We have put out billions through the bipartisan infrastructure law for the build out of long duration storage, and then in the few months since the Inflation Reduction Act passed, we've invested more than $1.5 billion for critical infrastructure at our labs. We started mobilizing resources for heat pump manufacturing and for states and tribes to support home energy rebate plans. So, I mean, for those of you who are interested in this and have people are interested in like renovating their homes or installing energy efficiency appliances or building those appliances in the United States, this is such a big time because the rebates and the tax incentives for people to install electric heat pumps or induction stoves or insulation or energy efficient windows or solar panels, incentives are amazing. 30% tax credits for all of these appliances and technologies to be able to reduce people's energy bills. So this is the time to both build as well as install these pieces of equipment. And up to this point, they've largely been manufactured, or much of it has been manufactured in other countries, and we are providing the incentives for that to be manufactured here as well. So, and then there's one other piece, which is we have a loan programs office, which is providing loans for technologies that need a bridge to bankability. And that loan programs office has billions and billions of dollars to partner with companies who are engaged in large scale and smaller projects that will get these technologies commercial. So, there's a whole suite of things that are being done by the Department of Energy to make this transition happen.
Well, there's a huge opportunity ahead for communities of all sizes here in the United States.
For sure.
As a result of this. one of the things we at the IEDC have been really focused on over the past couple of years is a focus on equitable economic outcomes and ensuring that communities don't get further left behind. And as these opportunities come forward, that we can really ensure that they're at the front end of these conversations. Can you talk a little bit about the Justice 40 initiative and DOE's role in trying to grow the clean energy sector, but also doing it in an equitable manner where all communities can participate?
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that you have this focus on it. It's just so important. So the President's Justice 40 initiative, which means that 40% of the benefits from these acts have to go to disadvantaged communities or communities that have been left behind. And so it puts really underserved and overburdened communities at the front of the line for clean energy investment. So at the Department of Energy, it means weaving equity into so much of the work that we are doing. We identified last year, I think, 140 programs that we'll use to advance the goals of Justice 40. And so we, for example, have invested millions for clean energy projects in tribal communities. Through our Communities LEAP program, we're supporting 23 communities that have been overburdened by pollution and climate change, and leveraging our DOE expertise in our labs to help these communities decide how they want to take advantage of this clean energy future. The bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we often talk about structural inequality, have embedded structural equality into them. So for example, the Inflation Reduction Act gives a kicker, an adder, if you will, if you locate a manufacturing facility in a disadvantaged community. It gives an adder. So for example, you might get a 30% tax credit to locate a manufacturing facility in the United States to produce clean energy technology. If you locate in a disadvantaged community, you might get an adder of 10, maybe even 20%. So that might be a 50% federal tax credit. If you have the building built with apprentices using not union labor, but using prevailing wage and have apprentices, which often is union labor, of course, but you get another adder. You might get as much as 60% tax credit to make sure that communities get to be able to take advantage of the jobs that are created in clean energy communities that have been disadvantaged. That is amazing. And then on the grant side, that's the tax credit side. On the grant side, the bipartisan infrastructure law, we have developed the programs where we're asking for, say, for example, in these hydrogen hubs, they're being evaluated based upon, do you have a community benefits agreement? 20% of your project is being evaluated on that. So you better have an agreement that benefits the communities that have been left behind. So from both the grant side as well as the tax credit side, there are incentives to right past wrongs and to give communities a chance at really economic viability in this sector where they might not have been thinking about it for. So I'm really excited about the fact that 75% of the jobs that are created by the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law don't require a college degree or a professional degree. And instead, they are apprenticeable opportunities where workers can get paid for on-the-job training. And the jobs, of course, will elevate their wages and their benefits in the community overall. So I love the pieces that have addressed the systemic issues that have beleaguered us. And that's why we are really confident that 40% of the benefits are going to go to communities that really need the opportunity. Very exciting.
Well, we're really appreciative of that approach and that thoughtfulness. One of the things we talk a lot about when you're talking about equitable economic outcomes is actually recognizing, what has led to inequity in the past and trying to address that and be very specific and intentional and doing very specific outreach to those communities. So you talked about all those things and what you just laid out. So thank you for sharing all that.
I love that you guys are doing that too.
One other piece around equitable economic development that maybe is a little bit is a part of the Department of Energy that maybe is not as well known, is that around a focus on small business growth, entrepreneurship, and innovation. Can you tell us a little bit more about DOE's work on innovation and commercialization, whether it's your labs, whether it's the DOE's energy Earth Energy Earth Shots Initiative and other things?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it is a huge part of our work to tackle the climate crisis. We're working on deploy, the technologies that are ready to go, like solar and wind, but we also have to innovate, right? So, according to the International Energy Agency, I think only 2 of 55 technologies that we need to achieve our climate goals are ready at the right cost and deployment levels. And that's why one of our biggest focuses is on accelerating commercialization of these key clean energy technologies. So to do it right, we need to keep doing early stage research and development like we do through ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Project Agency for Energy, and our national labs. So we're going to keep doing that while boosting capacity for demonstration and deployment to get new tech out the door. And that's why through these billions of dollars for demonstration projects under the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've realigned the department to emphasize the later stages of clean energy commercialization. So we've got the later stage happening. And then in 2021, the earlier stage, we launched these energy earth shots that you described. And they have big, hairy, audacious goals to slash costs and spur development within a decade. So for example, we have 6 technologies that we are focused on, it used to be called a moonshot. We're calling them an earth shot. So we've announced this for clean hydrogen, for long duration storage, for carbon dioxide removal. Carbon dioxide that's already in the atmosphere, we want to pull it out of the atmosphere. That technology is available. It's just expensive. We've got a cost goal to make that viable. Floating offshore wind platforms. So, you've seen the ones that are stationary and in the ground, but in the Pacific coast, it's the drop off is very steep. And so floating platforms are part of our hairy, audacious goals. Enhanced geothermal. And here you can have the oil and gas industry really jump in because they have expertise in the subsurface. We have heat beneath our feet, no matter where we are. How do you pull that heat up to spin a turbine to create electricity? That's very exciting. And then the reduction of industrial heat is another earth shot. We want to reduce by 85% industrial heat loss. So all of these are earth shots that require research, development, innovation, and deployment. And that's what we're all about now. So innovation is going to be crucial to tackling climate change for decades to come. And that's why we are investing in the entrepreneurs who want to be able to do that.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, you talked a lot about things that are happening or going to be happening over the coming years. How can local governments and states, quite frankly, be more active and proactive participants?
Well, we definitely want states, cities, organizations like the IEDC to be able to get the word out about what the president's agenda offers. So many of what we're offering depends on the private sector, as I say, jumping in, and depending on American households to take advantage of these tax credits. So luckily we have great resources for this. In particular, cleanenergy.gov shows people how they can start saving money and getting the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. But we encourage people to apply for these new opportunities. Keep watch on our Department of Energy site because we're always offering grant opportunities for these next generation technologies and for communities to be able to benefit and organize themselves around creating economic clusters for these technologies, support others who want to apply. So you can find updates about them all, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act on the website. You can always reach out to us too with questions or concerns. And if you know talented people who want to get in the fight against climate change, young people are super motivated by this mission, and old people too. I'm motivated by this mission. Tell them to look into joining our Clean Energy Corps, and that you'd go to energy.gov/Clean Energy Corps. That's all one word, CORPS, to learn more about that.
I want to tap into that enthusiasm you just showed, Secretary, and ask, taking a role as big as what you are currently in right now is no small task. It's no small task for you, for your family, and certainly for your own career. Like, why did you decide to take on this role as Secretary of Energy, and why was it important to you from the moment you left the governor's role in Michigan to where you are today, to continue to have this focus on economic development and providing good jobs for folks?
Nate, I mean, honestly, and that's why you're in this position too. You want to be able to do the greatest good for the greatest number. Why are we here if we are not to leave it better than when we arrived, right? And to have the platforms that you and I both have to be able to do this. Those who are watching have enormous platforms. Climate change is the biggest existential crisis that's facing us. I mean, if you look even today at what's happening in California, I mean, people are dying. And so what are we doing? We can achieve a win-win-win by addressing climate change, providing jobs, creating energy security. I feel so honored to be in this position with a boss who I adore, who's so committed to this as well. And I'm very grateful to you for allowing me to come on and talk a little bit about it.
Well, thank you for doing this. I want to circle back on two last questions before we let you go. One is to connect something you talked about earlier, and that is community colleges, vocational schools, technical colleges, and the role that workforce plays in this conversation, because we all know that economic development, workforce development are interrelated and interconnected. And I want to circle back to an experience you and I had together, and that was back in Michigan, in Greenville, Michigan. And I want just, if you're willing to share a little bit about how that experience shaped your own thoughts around how do we drive more equitable opportunities? How do we make sure that we're diversifying economies and leading to clean energy and good jobs in the future?
I mean, as you know, this experience, which if you've been doing economic development, those of you who are on for a while, you may have had a similar experience to this, which is we got a call. I got a call from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation saying, look, we have one of our biggest manufacturers who is about to leave Michigan. It was Electrolux. It was a refrigerator manufacturer. It was in a little town of Greenville, about 8,000 people, but 2,000 people worked at the plant. And it was basically a one company town. And they were so proud to have this huge factory, but the factory was going to move to Mexico where they could pay $1.57 an hour. And so we took all of our economic development experts and everybody to Greenville to try to put together an incentive package to keep them in Greenville. We put everything we had on the table, millions of dollars for helping to build them a new factory, the workforce training help, the tax incentives, you name it, we put it together. And the people from Electrolux who we met with, they went outside after they saw our list, they went outside the room for 13 minutes, I think. They came back in and they said, this is the most generous that any community has ever been to try to keep the jobs. But there's nothing you can do to overcome the fact that we can pay $1.57 an hour in Juarez, Mexico. So we're going. When that happened, it was like a nuclear bomb went off in that town. I mean, they had no other options. And, what really seared my soul, Nate, was I went to when the last refrigerator came off the assembly line, I went to this community gathering. They called it the Last Supper. It was at this big Clackles Orchard Pavilion. It was like a community wake. And I went up to a table. I wasn't invited because they were mad that I hadn't been able to be successful in keeping the plant. But I went up to this table and this father stands up to me and he says, Governor, says, I want you to meet my two daughters. They were like young teenagers. I have worked at this factory since I was 18 years old. My father worked at this factory. My grandfather worked at this factory. All I know, he said, is how to build refrigerators. And then he looked at his girls and he puts his hand on his chest like this. He says, so Governor, who is ever going to hire me? Who's ever going to hire me? And that was asked by everyone in the room, all the thousands of people who were losing their jobs and who felt like they had nothing. So fast forward, we relied upon our community colleges and our workforce training entities to create something called No Worker Left Behind, to build up the skill sets of workers for next generation jobs, for jobs that we knew were coming, that we were seeking to build an economic strategy around. If we had had the incentives that are in the Inflation Reduction Act for incentivizing apprenticeships, if we had had the incentives that you see now for incentivizing manufacturing of clean energy, if we had had the grants that are available now, we would have been able to hit it out of the park. And in fact, you know, after Electrolux left Greenville, you're aware that there was a solar factory that came. And that solar factory, we all celebrated. It was great. It was going to take over the factory space, the actual footprint that was there. And then the solar factory was poached by China. And so they were left again with nothing. If we had had the incentives, these are 10-year incentives to ensure the competitiveness, it would have been a different story. Today, it's a different story. And this is why I'm so full of hope, because we have an industrial strategy that empowers economic developers to get this done. Soup to nuts. So exciting.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It is the exact reason I asked that question is because it shows your approach, your personal connection to this work and to the impact in communities. And it also touches on why this work is so important and why we need to be preparing communities now for the next 10, 15, 25 years to ensure that they can all participate in the opportunities that lie ahead.
Yeah. Thank you.
Last question for you, Secretary Granholm. For those that are on the call, those that are doing this work every day from an economic development standpoint, what message do you want to leave with them today that they should take with them tomorrow?
I hope you see that there is no better time to be in economic development than right now. You will have no better opportunity, especially in this clean energy economy right now. Oh my gosh, I wish I were, and I am doing economic development now, but I would be celebrating, popping champagne corks, because you have the biggest set of incentives to make your community irresistible for economic development. So I just hope you get out and do it.
Thank you so much, Secretary Granholm, for being with us, for all that you're doing and for all that your team is doing to make sure that we're driving more equitable economic outcomes.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right.
Thank you for joining us.